And welcome everybody to the life and work of David Ray Griffin. I'm Richard Gage, AIA, architect.
And I'm Gail.
There she
Gage?
is.
Sorry.
Yep. I was just going to say I'm the founder of the original Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth and the former CEO. And with my wonderful wife, Gail, we have started RichardGage911. Right, Gail?
Yes, that's right.
Yes, and you have been a faithful assistant for a year. And on this, many years, on this particular, everybody turn off your cell phones. On this particular venture, we have had a number of exciting efforts, but none have been more impactful to create than the life and work of David Ray Griffin, a tribute that we're about, a celebration of this amazing man's work. And Gail, we have a co-host to help us. And
yes, we do.
And we're here to help her. Elizabeth Woodworth, tell us about her.
Yes, Elizabeth was a career medical librarian and the author and co-author of 5 books. She worked with David Ray Griffin in various capacities from 2006 to 2022. She proofread and edited 12 books of his and many of his essays. In fact, she co-authored 2 books with him directly. Elizabeth has also written in-depth reviews of most of his books from the 2006 to the 2022 period on Amazon. And she's a regular contributor to Global Research.
Mm-hmm. Quite a history on her own.
Yeah.
And there she is. Hello, Elizabeth.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, Richard. Hi, Gail. Good to see you.
Thank you. You too.
Good to see you. You have a bright, cheery background. Our backgrounds are a little bit dark, and we apologize for that. Hopefully you can see some of them. My fault. Elizabeth, how are you handling the loss of the man that you have supported professionally for 15 years? Tell us your thoughts.
Sure. I once counted the number of emails that we'd exchanged over that period, and it was 100,000.
Oh.
And
wow.
Yeah.
And I can assure you these are not personal emails either.
No, some were.
This is an extremely professional relationship.
Yes. Yeah, and the first thing that happened to me when he died, I was writing an article, and I suddenly realized what I had been doing all those years. I was internally consulting him. Would he do it this way or would he do it that way? Because I learned so much from him about writing. And my mind would sort of span the miles down to Santa Barbara, because I'm up in Victoria. And my mind would sort of go searching for what he would do, and he wasn't there. So that was hard. You know, but it didn't last long. I adjusted to that. I finally finished this article. But I think what interests me most about David now is who was the man that was underneath the 12 books or 15 books that he wrote on 9/11? Like, who did that and why? And I realized that when I wrote the review for his last published book on on Whitehead and James and Whitehead on life after death. And in that book, he did cover that, but he also covered his most mature theology. Like on the way out of his life, he knew he was going to die. And the theology that he presented in that book was extremely moving. And when I wrote my article to celebrate his life about 10 days ago, I guess, it went on Global Research, I couldn't believe the response to it because I had cited the words that he used in his book and that I put on in my review on Amazon back in April. And people were saying that they were really moved by it and so on. So I thought maybe I'd just read those words.
Thank you.
What I wrote was, in 2022, as he approached the end of his life and following a long struggle with prostate cancer, David wrote the beautiful and crowning reflections of his maturing theology, James and Whitehead on life after death. In the spirit of James and Whitehead, he explains that the universe is not separate from, but is within God, and is itself the very nature of God. I had to stop. Sorry. This evolving worldview requires a new understanding of the divine reality, panentheism, meaning all in God. Like pan is God, in theism in God. The causal principles of the universe exist naturally, being inherent in the nature of things, because they exist in the very nature of God. And I think people loved that. Like it's being translated into Chinese and Mandarin, I guess, and Italian and French. So, so I think that's really, and why we work together was because I have always shared that view myself, and I never had any choice. You know, like right from the first thing I read about, I read his book, the New Pearl Harbor Revisit, the New Pearl Harbor. That was in 2006. And I realized instantly, there's some kind of a connection between us here. I don't know what it is. And it took a while before we actually worked together. But I think that's where maybe a lot of people connect with David, is the underlying spirituality that has driven his insistence upon truth. And he didn't stop with 9/11. Like, he went to climate change, and he went to U.S. imperialism, and every one of those subjects we worked together, chapter after chapter, and it just suited me down to the ground. Like, I could not have not done it. Let's put it that way.
Gotcha. Well, what about David's background in education? Why don't we take a couple of steps back and see where he kind of came from? Can you share that with us?
Oh, absolutely. This is part of his curriculum vitae. And he was professor of philosophy and religion at the Claremont School of Theology and Claremont Graduate University from 1973 to 2004. And he was 14 years younger than John Cobb Jr., who they founded the school the Center for Process Studies in 1973. So I think David was in his early 30s then, and John was in his late 40s. Yeah, that's the beginning.
Awesome. Elizabeth, David was well known as a theologian.
Yeah.
Can you tell us why?
I think he has stated that the task of a theologian is to look at the world from what we would imagine the divine perspective to be. And we would imagine that it would be a perspective that would care about the good of the whole and would love all the parts. So there's a beautiful little clip that I think you have. It's about 2 or 3 minutes long on his, it was a clip when he was younger, maybe in his 40s.
Oh yeah, that one.
He
Incredible.
explains that. It's so beautifully. I don't know if now would be the right time to play it or not, but.
Well, let's see.
Have been confused on the nature of God. We so often think, well, real power is the kind of power you've got with a machine gun or with a tank or now with nuclear weapons. And so we say, that's real power. And then we think, well, if God is all-powerful, God must have even more of that kind of power to outdo that kind of destructiveness. When traditional theism started to wane in the 18th and the 19th century, we replaced the omnipotent power of God with the omnipotent power of matter. And there are even people who use that language in Bertrand Russell's famous essay, Free Man's Worship. He capitalizes omnipotent power, omnipotent matter. And so whether we've been theistic or atheistic, we have said it is brute power, coercive power that runs the universe. And so our religious drive, whether we're theists or atheists, have led us to think that it's that kind of power that really makes things run, and that's what we want to be a part of. And so we've had this desire to use that kind of power, and that's what's brought us to the brink of nuclear holocaust. What kind of power do we trust? What kind of power do we put our confidence in for our ultimate salvation? The things I was mentioning, life, love, concern for all living creatures, only love, only persuasion, only evocative power can produce those kinds of characteristics. And those are what we find supremely valuable. That other kind of power cannot produce anything valuable. It can only destroy. So why attribute that kind of power to God when our fundamental confession is God is our creator?
Well, that sets us up for a discussion. But first, how many of you out there listening today and watching have seen David Ray Griffin at such a young, impressionable, and handsome? Would you say that, Gail?
Absolutely. He's right behind. Well, he's over here. You just can't see him very well because unfortunately the screen's kind of dark. But yes, he was very handsome, very strapping.
Okay, that aside, because that impressed me also. Elizabeth, tell us a little bit about David Ray Griffin, the theologian. Before we ever got into, we heard of him in the 9/11 Truth movement. He had already spent, what, 50 years writing 25 books? Tell us about this part of this man, this amazing man.
I didn't come upon him until 2006, so I really have no prior knowledge of what he was doing before that. Did Bonnie do a clip on that, or did somebody else do a clip on his earlier life? Like there is a list of books somewhere, which I don't seem to have in front of me, that he wrote before he retired in 2004. And then was approached about, some people said, Dr. Griffin, we think you would be interested in this evidence of blowback or of some kind of an inside job on 9/11. And his first response was, no, that's just blowback from the way we've treated the Middle East. I think he was going to actually write an article opposing that view, and he started looking into it, how he was going to oppose this idea of an inside job, and he realized, oh my goodness, it's true. So
and he does actually tell that story. I was incredibly impressed with that. Let's have a listen. What motivated you to write?
Being told by several people that I needed to look into this because it looked like the government was complicit, And for a while I would look at possible websites and so on, and I didn't find it convincing. And finally I found Paul Thompson's work, which has now been published as a book called The Terror Timeline. And it had an amazing amount of material drawn from strictly mainline sources that simply contradicted the official account. So I started reading more and more stuff, and I read Nafiz Ahmed's book, The War on Freedom. I read then Terry Mason's book on Pentagate and 9/11, The Big Lie. And then I did learn more about what was going on in the internet. I never had been an internet person. And I saw that a lot of people have been working on this for a long time, but most of them were people who would never be able to get a book published. And I thought, well, since I've published about 25 books before, maybe I would have a shot at it. Even then, it was much more difficult than I thought. Most publishers simply wouldn't respond to my letters. But I kept at it till I found brave little Interlink Books, which was willing to do it. And so first of all, I just thought it was a duty, the fact that this enormous amount of research had been done, and that it certainly presented a credible case that people needed to know about, and that maybe I was in position to bring that to the public. So for the most part, the new Pearl Harbor has hardly any original material in it. It's mainly just an organization of work that other people has done, and a presentation of it in a fairly brief and fairly readable way. So that was the primary motivation. Certainly, I was also motivated by these other concerns. As a theologian, I'm committed to the good of the whole universe, the good of the whole earth. And if it looks like there is a gang that has gotten control of our government and our purse strings to use it for very selfish and imperialistic purposes, then that needs to be exposed.
And indeed, did he begin and is still exposing it. Before we proceed, we know that you're watching out there, and we want to say hello to you. Hello, everybody out there.
Yes,
Hello.
hello.
And if you have questions or comments, Gail will bring them, the questions. Well, how does that work, Gail? Go ahead.
So while the speakers are speaking, at the end of each one, if you have comments that you would like to share, I can share briefly a couple comments, and then the questions will be at the end when we have everybody all together to answer those questions. And I believe that whatever platform you're on right now, there will be a comment probably under the video. So just type in your questions or comments under the video, and then I'll copy and paste them over and share them.
Thank you. Now, this is a good moment for me to share how I came across this amazing man, because boy, was I shocked. The Off Guardian in the UK is a media outlet that challenges The Guardian, the official mainstream media outlet. They asked me to write something, and I wanted to share that with you. His voice was deceptively gentle on the radio that afternoon on March 29th, 2006. I had by chance tuned to the FM station KPFA on my way back from a construction observation meeting in the San Francisco Bay Area. There was a very brave talk show host, Bonnie Faulkner, who was the only one at the station willing to take deep dives into exposing the deep state. But I didn't know about that or her yet, nor of her mysterious guest that day, Dr. David Ray Griffin. She was asking him to share with her audience his findings, having just discovered Graham McQueen's deep research into the 500 pages of explosive testimonies of the oral histories of hundreds of 9/11 first responders. This was recently released in 2005, August, by the New York City under a court order. This professor of theology carefully read many of these eyewitness statements of explosions, one after another. I found myself entering a state of what I became aware of later was called cognitive dissonance. I had never heard any alternative theories about how the Twin Towers came down. I couldn't drive and listen at the same time. This testimony was powerful. It required all of my brain to process the message, and it already was contradicting my worldview. I pulled my car into the parking lot and just sat and listened to the rest of it, in horror, actually. I thought I knew very well what happened on 9/11. I was a Reagan Republican, and I wanted to go into Afghanistan and Iraq and get those bastards who did this to us. But here was this very well-spoken, seemingly objective, elderly gentleman telling me about beams flying out of the towers laterally, dripping with molten metal, impaling themselves into buildings hundreds of feet away. He even tried to tell me that a third tower came down. Wasn't even hit by a plane. What are you talking about? I'm an architect. I would have known if there was a third tower that came down. They would have told me. Boy, did I have a lot to learn. This was a huge wake up. Either this guy was the biggest con artist, or I had been conned by my own government. And I just couldn't go there. Not yet, anyway. I would prove him wrong. I went to see him the next night at the Grand Lake Theater in Oakland, but I was late, and he had attracted a sellout crowd of 600 people. Where'd they go? Oh, let me show you the people.
I'm still here.
Oh, I know. No, not you people. the other people. I have to do this, and then I have to do this. Hang on, you got to see this. This was an extraordinary moment in my life. And there we are. Okay. There. That's what I was confronted with. I'm going, what? Learned the truth about 9/11? David Ray Griffin? Because I had heard him on the radio the day before. And here I'm walking into it, and they wouldn't even let me in. They were sold out. They told me, you can go listen on the live stream. Of course, I didn't know I was going to be the only architect to create an organization dedicated to exposing what he was exposing here. So I went home and I caught the last half or so, and I didn't even know they had live streams. I mean, I didn't know what a live stream was, but I figured it out. In 2001, they weren't that plentiful. It was a deeply moving presentation that covered a whole lot more ground than I had heard on the radio, and it was delivered with a simple logic that I just couldn't fight. David Ray Griffin stepped aside and let his evidence do the work, and that became a model for me. But right away, I knew that night I was in trouble. By the time he was done with me, I'd felt like I'd been turned upside down and inside out. I was confused, raw, and vulnerable. Yet this had turned to anger in the days and weeks to come, and the anger turned into action as I independently verified his outrageous insinuations about my government and the media, who had lied to me on a colossal scale. It was his unique, unassuming style that had stripped me defenseless and enabled me to see the truth. I learned that millions of others were easily taken apart at the seams by the logic in his 15 books, ultimately, and dozens of presentations around the world on the subject of 9/11. Looking back on the painful transformation caused by this innocent man, I have indeed arrived at a state of deep gratitude. For he and others inspired by him, such as Stephen Jones, who's with us today, Over the course of the following years, mentored and encouraged me to follow in some giant footsteps and speak my newfound truth. And here is that crew and mentors who inspired architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth in 2007 and who inspires me still. In fact, he'll live in my heart and continue to be heard as long as I'm able to speak. And that's what I wrote for them.
Beautiful.
Very moving, Richard, what you went through. Yeah.
That's a lot. And this man, I mean, we owe everything to him. And that's not all. Oh, Gail has a question for you, Elizabeth.
Yes, Elizabeth, can you share with us some of the books that you helped David write and the ones that you edited for him?
Yeah, sure. I'll have to look at the list.
That's totally fine.
Now, it's in small print. Yeah, I learned of him by reading The New Pearl Harbor in 2006. And then I started writing with him in later that year, actually in December. And the first book was Debunking 9/11 Debunking. And he asked me, would you like to just read over one of my chapters? So I did. And I made my notations on it. And he said, well, yeah, that's really good. That's better than 2 other proofreaders have come up with. So would you like to read some more chapters? So I ended up reading all the chapters in the books, in that book, and then all the footnotes. And as a librarian, a lot of those footnotes needed to be improved upon. Like, you know, they were not primary sources. They were secondary sources. And that's important. So the next one was after that. I guess it was there's so many. There are 12 of them. That would be, I didn't work on the 9/11 Commission report. That was before I got into the act here. I guess it was 9/11. I can't really see that on the screen. 9/11 Revisited. The 9/11 Contradictions, that was another one. These were all around 2007, 2008. Then there was the one that Publishers Weekly gave Pick of the Week to, which happens to 51 books every year only. The biggest reviewing tool in the world, in the English-speaking world. And 51 books a year get this distinction of being Pick of the Week. And David's second book, the New Pearl Harbor Revisited, in November 2008, Publishers Weekly gave it that pick. There wasn't a peep anywhere in the mainstream media. It should have been picked up by the New York Times and by the Times Literary Supplement, by all the major reviewing. And so there was dead silence. And then you know how absolutely coordinated and tight this suppression of real information is in the world, not just the United States.
That was a wake-up call.
Wasn't
Huge for me, yeah.
And then what else? There was Bush and Cheney. Let's see, he got through the main 9/11 books, and then he started going into American imperialism. He wrote his big climate book, Unprecedented: Can Civilization Survive the CO2 Crisis, in 2015. And that was because it was the year of the huge climate conference in Paris, COP21, which I went to. I managed to get in there, which isn't easy. And I took his book and I actually presented it, not to the 40,000 people, but to some of them. And so that was kind of fun to go to that enormous gathering of humanity. It was the biggest gathering of humanity since World War II. So his book was seen there. Then he did a wonderful book I'm not sure which year, it was about 2018. Um, oh, I don't have the title in front of me, just a second. The American Trajectory and Divine or Demonic. And that is, he went and he read all the current university press summaries, from good authors of the history of American imperialism, the way it has been unearthed, as opposed to the way we've been told it through the history books. And he got all that together. And it's just an extraordinary book, another wake-up call book. And then, finally, in 2019, he got to the book he'd been putting off for decades. And that was his systematic theology of Christianity. And it's called The Christian Gospel for Americans, a Systematic Theology. And I helped him with that one too.
Incredible.
And then, of course, we did the 9/11 consensus panel together. That was a 7-year project, and quite a few of the people that are here today on the panel were consensus panel members. And we produced 51. It was a really elaborate reviewing process called the Delphi method. And every panel member was given, on each of the 51 consensus points that we reviewed about 9/11, each person would provide review and feedback on each of these 51 points, and they weren't allowed to talk to each other and influence each other. So at the end of that 7-year project in 2018, we published our book. Don't tell me the name of it. I'm losing my memory for names. 9/11 Unmasked. So then so that was 2018.
Well, let's jump to the nomination. Gail, what was that about? You're on mute, Gail.
Wasn't David nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, he was. At his sort of heyday, I guess 2008 was around the time that Publishers Weekly gave him the pick of the week. 2 years in a row, he was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. And about the same time, the New Statesman, which is a long, ancient sort of honored publication, newspaper in the UK, they wrote an article, and they said, of the 50 people who matter the most today, this was in 2009, and they named David Griffin as one of them, of the people in the world that matters the most.
Well, let me give you an example of why that might be true. Let's listen to the legend himself and listen to the logic here.
Official story about 9/11. America, because of its goodness, was, according to the official story about 9/11, America, because of its goodness, was attacked by fanatical Arab Muslims who hate our freedoms. This story has clearly functioned as a sacred myth since that fateful day. And this function appears to have been closely, carefully orchestrated. When anyone asks what right the administration has to invade and occupy other countries, to imprison people indefinitely without due process, or even to ignore various laws, the answer is always the same: 9/11. Given the role that the official account of 9/11 has played, the most important question before our country today is whether this account, besides being a myth in the religious sense, is also a myth in the pejorative sense. That is, it is simply false. The official account of 9/11 can easily be seen to be composed of a number of ideas that are myths in the sense of not corresponding with reality. I will discuss 9 of the major myths contained in the official story about 9/11. I will thereby show that the official account cannot be defended in light of the relevant evidence against the main alternative account, according to which 9/11 was an inside job, orchestrated by people within our own government.
Well, he goes on to take apart the official myth, which was a sacred myth, which we all bought, most of us bought into and hold to this day. And we're up against this incredible block that we have internalized, American imperialism, with the title of another one of his incredible books. But Elizabeth, you've assembled, along with David Ray Griffin, 23 experts on a set of panelists for the Consensus 9/11 Project. Can you go a little bit deeper into that? We have about a minute for this segment.
Yes, we had two of the people, four of them here today were on the panel. Niels Harrit and Stephen Jones and David Chandler and Fran Shure were on the panel, and there were journalists, a number, Massimo Mazzucco and Roland Morgan. There were all kinds of different. There was a physician on the panel. So like we tried to cover the whole spectrum of things, of professions that were could comment on what happened on 9/11, and the book actually has done quite well. I think architects and engineers called it the Bible of the truth movement, because the evidence-based model we used was basically irrefutable. Like, these people couldn't talk to each other for 7 years about the evidence that they were reviewing. And so we got a good press, David's Olive Branch Press, Interlink, they published it. And so it all ended up quite successfully. And I do think that David's books are going to go down in history. Because they're the clearest research that's been done for posterity to look back on.
And here's the one that's going down in my history book, because I use this, I'm not going to say religiously, but deeply and often. Yeah. And it's an inch thick just on building 7, which is the subject of our film that we're making, inspired by David Ray Griffin originally. It's called 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom, where we interview many of the experts assembled here today. And we present the evidence in an inescapable manner to a special grand jury who will be educated along with the evidence by the litigation director, Mick Harrison, for the 9/11, the lawyers for 9/11 inquiry. So that's an amazing thing that's in the pipeline here shortly to come. But I also want you to hear one more incredible clip from David Ray Griffin, because he was asked by Bonnie Faulkner.
Who reject the idea that there could be any kind of conspiracy, do it on an a priori basis. They say, well, our government would never do such a thing. Our military, they're so protective of human rights and the precious sacredness of every human life. They would never do anything like this. Well, people just need to learn the history and realize that 3,000 lives taken on 9/11, in terms of the kind of cost-benefit analysis that the military is trained to do and that the CIA is trained to do, this was a very, what they would call high cost-benefit operation. When you look at Vietnam, that enterprise, you're talking about tens of thousands of Americans killed after we knew the war was futile, after we knew we could not win, and we were simply fighting to save American credibility. Tens of thousands were sacrificed. So to kill 3,000 on 9/11, given that kind of mindset that thinks in those terms, this was not a bad price to pay.
Well, how can people respond to this? What can be done?
Well, the immediate thing, of course, is if you become convinced you've got criminals in the White House, get rid of them. More long-term, we need to overcome plutocracy. Plutocracy is, rather than where democracy is ruled by the people, of the people, for the people. Plutocracy is rule by the rich, of the rich, for the rich. And we have a system now in which the richest 1 to 5% of the country calls the shots for America, and therefore calls the shots for the world. So we need to, this may sound simplistic, but the biggest single step we could take would be to get rid of all private financing of elections. That's why these politicians cannot tell the truth. That's why they can't buck the corporations. That's why we only get rich people or people who are sponsored by rich corporations who can run for national office. So we need public financing so that honest people can get in the government and pass laws, and then we can get honest people in the White House who will execute those laws. So I would say that would be the next thing. And thirdly, work for global democracy, and in my forthcoming books I'll be describing the reasons for that.
Work for global democracy. Now that's a bit of a mystery to me. I hadn't heard that term from David before, but you did hear some of his politics, which you may not have even known, that he has some political aims as well for freedom of the American people. Elizabeth, final thoughts?
Well, there's good news. His last book hasn't come out yet, and it's about his politics. It's about the Ukraine war. And the title is America on the Brink, How the U.S. Trajectory Led Fatefully to the Ukraine War, coming out in March 1st, I think, from Clarity Press. So we've still got that to look forward to.
Yay.
Awesome.
Well, this is great. We are going to hear from a number of very special people today. They're all lined up. They're here in the studio, well, remotely. And I would just like you to meet our first one. And who is that? None other than the videographer of David Ray Griffin, Mr. Ken Jenkins. Hi, Ken.
Hi there.
Hey.
Hi, Ken.
There he is, 9/11 researcher. How long now, Ken?
Well, I started a week after 9/11 doing research, so do the math.
A week. Okay, that's 21 years at least. I think he's got me beat by 5 years, and the rest of us by many. Ken, talk to us.
Well, I want to pick up this story in 2003. My own story, as I said, started a week after. I pretty much knew a lot of what David talked about in that interview in terms of U.S. foreign policy. So I never kind of bought the official story. I thought it was blowback. But I didn't know about false flags. And I was sent some information by email a week after the event. I followed up on it, and it started answering some of the questions like, where the heck were the fighter jets that I had? And by November, after studying a lot about false flags and learning about Pearl Harbor, I became convinced that it was what they were saying, a false flag. And I figured, well, I'm a video producer. This movement's going to need videos. I guess I have a job, not a good paying job, but a worthwhile job. And I started putting together actually first a PowerPoint presentation and kind of went from there, met Carol Burley and so forth. And by 2003, we were doing a lot of tabling at the Iraq War protests here in San Francisco, and meeting a lot of people like Jim Hoffman. I was the first to talk to him about the towers. And then, of course, David's first book came out in 2003, April, I believe. And so I was, Carol was promoting that with the Deception Dollar, and wanted to invite him to the first major multi-day event here in the U.S., the International Inquiry, which happened in March of 2004. she wanted to invite David, and was not available, and so she handed that task off to me, and I invited him. He politely turned us down, saying that his book, as he just said, was not any original. There was not anything original in his book, and he didn't know what he would have to say to a group of nearly 1,000 9/11 truthers who had been on it for a lot longer. And so he declined. And it wasn't actually until October of 2003 that Paul Burks, who is Fred Burks' father, invited David Ray Griffin to speak for the first time on this subject in Santa Rosa, which is fairly near where I lived. And so I showed up with my assistant and camera, and we recorded that first video in October 2003, which is also when the interview we were watching was done, which I illustrated. So I went ahead and put together a video. I got camera footage from other videographers that were there, including one I invited, and of course consulted with David. I illustrated it with about 150 illustrations, videos, and graphics, and showed it to him. And since David doesn't use PowerPoint, he liked what I did, and eventually I became his exclusive videographer for a number of years. And we did a series of videos, which we're now seeing. The one on the bottom left there is the video that was made there in Santa Rosa. Or no, I think that's the one from, it was also seen on C-SPAN.
Oh, let me add, Ken, that many of these videos are up on our website in a special section dedicated to David Ray Griffin of his works. And so that website is RichardGage911.org. And just click on the wonderful face of David Ray Griffin wherever you find it, and you'll find these videos there. Go ahead.
So yeah, this is to kind of illustrate the parallels between the books and the videos that David and I did. Excuse me. The New Pearl Harbor, of course, came out before I started working with him. And then when he did Emissions and Distortions, he did actually 2 presentations, and the one there in Santa Rosa was the first, Truth and Politics. And then many months later, he did another presentation in Vermont, and that became a two-talk DVD, the second one, the orange one. And then when he did the Christian Faith book, we did he did a presentation in his hometown of Santa Barbara. Prior to that, I had, after we'd done those first few videos together, I arranged to meet with him at his house in Santa Barbara and to talk to him about what I realized was needed at that time, which was, rather than all these specialized videos, was the one that was just the best evidence all in one video. And that became The Myth and the Reality. He agreed to do that and asked me to do the Christian Faith one, which I did as well. And Myth and Reality became, and still is, his #1 bestseller video.
Oh, and Ken, people can actually buy this video from you, right? Where do they find that?
Well, my website is 9-11tv.org, 9-11tv.org. And you can also find it on my YouTube channel, just under my name, if you look for it.
Ken Jenkins. And it's free to watch on YouTube and on our website also, RichardGage911.org.
Right. So so this was my big chance, and we managed to have it happen in the Bay Area, which worked out well because another activist here in the Bay Area got David into the Commonwealth Club, which is a highly prestigious downtown San Francisco place for distinguished speakers. And so I videotaped there with a 6-camera crew that I was directing. And then in the Grand Lake Theater, he was able to give his full presentation Again, I was in there with a 6-person crew directing and made the video that became Myth and Reality, combining those two different locations. So that was the big start. And after that, I think on the next slide, we have kind of where that went. Again, correlating books and videos. Yeah, this one. All the way on the right, I think is where Elizabeth came in with 9/11 debunking as editor. And in David's hometown in Seattle, Washington, where he was born in Washington, he gave the talk that he liked the best, which was Let's Get Empirical, which correlated with the debunking book. And so it kind of went on like that, where we were sort of matching books and videos for a few more years. And then I eventually, as Richard knows, I got involved doing videos for AE 9/11, and that kind of took up all my time, and I had to sort of retire from producing videos for David Ray Griffin, and a few other people stepped in and did the videos that happened after that.
Awesome. And Gail might have a comment from our audience to share.
Yes. Well, this is from our panelists. There are no comments from the audience.
Oh,
so
not yet.
Yes. Nope.
This is your invitation, you guys.
Yes, and I'm not sure what the platform is that they're going to be commenting from.
Do you have a comment though? Sure.
So there was a comment from Peter Dale Scott. This was to Elizabeth, though. He says, and
all right, is it private?
He just said that David Ray Griffin's theology books will go down in history also. Yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
well,
including his current book on the after death that you I think mentioned there, Elizabeth.
And our next guest to share with us is Mr. Peter Dale Scott himself, former English professor, UC Berkeley author. Let's bring him on. And where did he go? I'm going to find you, Peter. You cannot evade me. I see you right there. You are. He can't get away. Oops, that's Stephen. Go away, Stephen. We're going to bring you back. Stephen Jones is here with us too. Peter, I saw you. Did he disappear? Alan, do you see Peter anywhere? There he is. Nope, that's a slide.
While you're looking, let me just give a plug also for Fred Burks and his Want to Know website. That was the website that David found when he was looking into 9/11 to start with, and he found how Fred had featured Paul Thompson's work with his timeline, and that's what got him working with us.
Well,
there's
hey,
Peter.
and guess
Hi,
who's
Peter.
joined us? Mr. Peter Scott himself. I think I knocked you out of the studio, and hopefully you clicked back in. Hi, Peter.
Hi.
Look up here and say hi to everybody.
I'm so glad that this is happening and that there are people watching. David will be remembered anyway, but anything we can do to help his memory is, I think, a good deed. I do want to begin by responding to Elizabeth. She said that his 9/11 books will go down in memory. I think the whole emphasis of my talk is going to be talk about all those other books, which I think is an even more important contribution, from which he took a kind of leave in order to deal with an emergency problem. He has developed very much a state-of-the-art process theology, which is based on the metaphysics of Alfred North Whitehead, which in turn was a response by a philosopher to the findings of the quantum mechanics, that there's indeterminacy in the universe. And Whitehead picked up on that to see that as a critique really of the way the Enlightenment had collapsed into a kind of naive materialism, which treated the universe as made out of inert matter. And in fact, he said, no, it's a process with its own history and its own development, and that an atom isn't just a piece of something. It is an electron and a proton who exist by being aware of each other. So he came up with this notion of prehension, being aware of other things, which unites the electron, being prehending the proton, with you and I who love each other and love the world and want to make it better. And maybe I could begin by reading something he wrote about this. No, I want, because I'm scared I won't last. I won't finish in 10 minutes. So I want to begin at the end and say that this process theology isn't just a matter of concern for theologians. It is a hope for the world, and particularly now when America and China are beginning to start a new Cold War, possibly. I don't want to be pessimistic about this, but there's a good chance that's happening. I went to a dinner in honor of David Ray Griffin, I think it was almost 10 years ago. And at my table was a woman from China. And I said I was very impressed that under the communist regime in China, they allow you to study process theology. And she said, yes, we have 24 centers in China. And at that time, when I wrote about David, I pointed out that time, I'm sure this figure is out of date, but at that time, he had been translated into 13 languages. But what really impressed me is that the majority of those languages were from Asia. And then there was Arabic, which I count in that category. And many people have pointed out the strong similarities between Buddhism and process theology. And with that, now I am going to read from his Christian Faith book, because it sums up better than I could what's happening here. Whitehead's doctrine that all individuals embody creativity means that at least some iota of responsive, self-determining creativity, as well as some degree of outgoing causal creativity, is exercised by all events, even those in the primordial chaos. Such a view would have been ridiculed in the 19th century when science was heavily committed to a strict determinism. You know, Einstein himself could never really swallow quantum mechanics because he wanted so much for the universe to be orderly that he could not accept this idea of indeterminacy. But I think now the consensus is that on this one point, Einstein was wrong and the quantum mechanics people were right. And then this is back to David again. Since the discovery of quantum indeterminacy, this idea is not ruled out. The idea is also increasingly supported by biologists who have discovered that bacteria make decisions. Likewise, the scientist Robert Mulliken once said that if molecules were as big as dogs, we would unhesitatingly attribute the power of decision-making to them. I like this passage not only because he managed to englobe a great deal of sources for this principle of indeterminacy. It also shows his style as a writer, which he was. Nobody said this yet, I think, that his books were not just good for content, they were very well written. And it was always a pleasure. He was also very well spoken. It was always a pleasure to be with him. And, I forget to set my timer. How am I doing? We're running a bit behind, and I don't want to contribute to the delay.
Alan, we need to see the timer in the private chat. We've got a secret behind the scenes.
Yeah, well, I had my own timer, but I forgot to set it.
4 minutes left.
It's left. let me say a bit more about Whitehead and why he's important to David. Whitehead wrote many books. He won one which I liked, which was Science in the Modern World, in which he attributed the breaking of the rigid Newtonian model in large part to poets. That Wordsworth, for example, and he quotes quite a large amount of Wordsworth in that book, seeing nature in a way which was at odds with the way that mechanical materialist physicists were coming to see the world. And his major book was Process and Reality, in which he talked about the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. And I think I've already summed that up, that an atom isn't a concrete thing. It's a series, it's the events of two particles prehending each other. And that opens up the whole universe to something which is developing. And now I think it's become part of common knowledge that there's theories of how it began, the Big Bang theory, and the other theories. But this is, in a way, more hopeful than the Newtonian idea of the universe was, because we were, if you believe the Newtonian universe, we were sort of stuck in it. But if you believe in the process universe, there's hope for that making better. And then this comes to God's relationship to that universe. You heard about panentheism, but here is an idea that the universe is responding to God, human history is responding to God, but it works the other way around, that the God is also responding to what humans are doing. And if you take a look at what humans were like 2,000 years ago, we were very different from what we are now. David wrote in his Christian faith book, he drew a lot of very telling parallels between the Roman Empire and the American Empire. But I want to say that there are also ways in which I think the American Empire is better than the Roman Empire. And I'll just give one very concrete detail. And that is that to reinforce the military mood of its citizens, Rome set up the gladiatorial games, and it became a form of entertainment for everybody to go to the games in the Colosseum and watch people kill each other for entertainment. And St. Augustine, in his Confessions, talks about his friend Alypius, who became a saint in the end, a bishop. But he didn't want to go to the games because he disapproved of them. His friends dragged him there, and he said, I'll go, but I won't look. But then when he heard the fight getting to its end, he couldn't overcome his own nature. He had to look. Well, if I'm coming back to how are we better now than in the days of Rome, I think most of us have overcome that desire to see people killed. Not everybody, unfortunately, and there is still an awful lot of killing going on in the world. Some of it, including some of the special forces people trained by America who boast about how they love to kill. So we have by no means eliminated this, but at least we've taken it out of the public specter and privatized it and pushed it a bit to the sidelines. It's been slow progress, but we're having, I see that my time is up. I'll just leave you with that thought that we should not be depressed by things like 9/11. We can deal with them. America is a society that does deal with them. And I hope that we will continue to follow in David Ray Griffin's footsteps and continue.
Well, we will owe it to him, Peter, in great measure, if we succeed. And fingers crossed, and hearts are turned into action, and we're all inspired by this great man, as you have been. Thank you so much for sharing these deeper thoughts. It's fantastic. we want to introduce another great man, Mr. Paul Craig Roberts, to our esteemed panelists here. He's an author, a scholar, a journalist. Let's bring him on. I'll bet I can find him. There he is. Hello, Craig.
Hello, Richard and everyone.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Richard, I would just like to tell everybody really quick that the mystery's been solved. I found where the comments are being left, which is on our website. Richard wasn't sure where I would find those. So I'm on the website with my phone, and I can read the comments and questions now.
Please.
So just let me know.
Give us a couple.
To the time. All right. This is from Milton. He says, in honor of this great dedicated patriot, we must carry on with his work to right our ship of state, as presently we have no operational constitution, and both sides of the aisle are committed to mortal combat, even at the peril of now sacrificing us by the unnecessary antagonisms directed at a very dangerous state, antagonisms directed at a very dangerous state, Russia, and as well is holding hands with another oppressive communist regime where a lot of our military hardware is being purchased. And then this is from...
One more quick one and then...
Okay.
Great.
This is from Peter. Wonderful words, Richard. Kind of like I discovered you being interviewed on 6:40 a.m. Toronto, then subsequently being involved in the black hole of 9/11 research. I was already researching, albeit very late, as far as people awakening, myself not being on unlimited net. Then he goes on, but he's just very grateful. Lots of great encouragement and kind words.
Oh, thank you, Gail, and thank you, Peter, and this Peter with us here now. We'll let you go, and we'll focus on Mr. Paul Craig Roberts.
Yes.
What are your thoughts today, Craig?
Okay, Richard. Well, as Peter Dale Scott made clear, David Ray Griffin was a man of very broad and varied intellectual capability. I'm familiar with his 9/11 work, especially as I reviewed a number of the volumes. And what strikes me about David Ray Griffin is that he was a person who could differentiate between good and evil, and he recognized the power of evil. And when the event that we know as 9/11 occurred, Griffin deduced from the inadequacy of the official explanation and from the evil use of 9/11, both at home and abroad, that the Cheney-Bush regime made of 9/11, that much was amiss. He set aside his work on the philosophy of religion and scientific naturalism and to investigate and provide a true account, which he did in a large number of books. Perhaps there were a dozen. Now, others, of course, among us also contributed to establishing the facts. Among them are yourself, Richard, and the fearless scientists such as Stephen Jones and Niels Harrit, the physicist David Chandler, and others on this program. And of course, Graham McQueen, who exposed the anthrax deception. Well, David Ray Griffin stayed on the case, book after book, and hammered it home.
Mm-hmm.
Now, people interested enough to pay attention have, for the most part, concluded that the neoconservatives who occupied the highest offices in the Pentagon, the State Department, the National Security Council, and thereby they all were under Cheney's protection, the vice president, and thereby also under President Bush's protection. The view is that they attacked our country in order to have their new Pearl Harbor, to free them to decimate the Middle East and North Africa in the interest of Israel. Of course, many other people benefited from these wars. For example, the military security complex profits, and of course, the enemies of the Constitution. We must remember that the Bush regime suspended habeas corpus and asserted the medieval right of casting people into prison without evidence presented to a judge and jury and without obtaining conviction in a trial. And we have to remember that the Obama regime went further and asserted the right of the President of the United States to execute American citizens on suspicion alone without due process. In my opinion, David Ray Griffin was alarmed by the ability of evil to use the American government for evil aims. I think he concluded that we had no chance of throwing off the evil that was engulfing us unless the people understood that the narrative given them was false. And he relied on logic to establish the falsity of the official narrative of 9/11. So the question that's before us is, how powerful is truth and the logic that supports it? The answer is not reassuring. Remember the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. All known evidence refutes that he was killed by Oswald. No known evidence supports the official narrative. Yet the official narrative still stands. It stands because no U.S. government, regardless of power, of the party that's in power, will acknowledge a criminal action by the United States government. The event known as 9/11 is also exposed. Anyone paying attention knows the official explanation is false, but the official story remains in place because the government doesn't admit the facts. So historians and so-called fact checkers repeat the false accounts as proof that the true accounts are false. It seems to be the case that it's only the word of the liar that counts. Those of us still extant who respect truth and know that evil cannot be held in check if truth is suppressed have as our obligation to continue David Ray Griffin's opposition to the rising power of evil. And with that, I'm finished with my remarks.
Thank you. I think he would agree with you. And we've all got some searching to do, including those of you who are watching. Gail is going to be bringing us some of your comments and questions for later. Is there one for now, Gail?
Here's a comment from Valerie. She says, thank you so much for this. She's letting us know. This is actually how I knew. She says, there are a number of comments below. Not sure I'm not seeing them. But thank you all for all your years of work. And thanks to Ken for introducing DRG to my life, Valerie. Oh, sweet. That is so sweet.
Yes. Yeah. You know, it's the San Francisco 9/11 Truth Group as a whole. It's actually called the San Francisco Oakland 9/11 Alliance. And they together brought David Ray Griffin to the San Francisco Bay Area, to the Grand Lake Theater. And that was, of course, a fateful night, the day before of which was my fateful day, listening to him on the radio. Part of me wants to go back and kind of take the blue pill. You know, it's been a tough life. You've taken a few red pills, Craig. Do you have regrets?
If I had sold out Reagan when I was Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, which is what the Republican establishment wanted me to do, and of course the liberal media, If I had sold him out and he had not succeeded with his economic program, I'd probably be worth $100 million.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Okay. We won't call that a regret yet.
But I don't regret doing what needed to be done, and I have no use for $100 million.
Aw.
Well, is there one more comment, Gail?
Yes, here's another comment. This is from Carol Brule. She says, thank you for organizing this webinar tribute to David Ray Griffin. As I recall, Paul Burks, a great follower of David Ray Griffin and a pastor, drew David's attention to his son's work. His son, Fred Burks, had a number of websites and organized material questioning the official narrative of 9/11. Fred's work helped compel David to look more deeply into 9/11. Wow, that's awesome.
Good piece of history there.
Yes, yes.
Our next guest panelist is Dr. Stephen Jones, Professor Emeritus of Physics, formerly with Brigham Young University. He joins us. Let's bring Stephen on. We can find him. I brought him. I found him before, didn't I, Gail?
When you weren't even looking, yes.
There he is. He waves his hand. Stephen, you'll be on mute. If you can come off mute, we'll bring you all the way in.
Thank you.
There he is.
I'm off mute, right?
Welcome to our esteemed group of. I am so humbled by the people who I have learned so much from and been so inspired by. And of course, as I mentioned, you are right up there with the top of them. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Richard and Gail. I'm just happy to join with fellow researchers and friends to give credit and thanks to David Griffin. So let me talk a little about my 9/11 journey, which began in spring of 2005. When a few friends persuaded me to look into the events of 9/11 with a scientific eye. I was a full professor, excuse me, of physics at that time. I soon found videos of the rapid collapse of World Trade Center 7, which I had not seen before. I was astounded when I looked at the videos, since the building collapsed completely and nearly straight down, as most of you know, on the afternoon of 9/11. And yet this magnificent skyscraper had not even been hit by a plane. I pulled out my stopwatch immediately. I timed the collapse of the building.
Like a good physicist would.
Yeah. I got 6.5 seconds. And next I found out the height of the building. I did a straightforward calculation. The building fell at nearly free fall acceleration. Wow. The implications of this were enormous, and I might say that I had a few nights of sleeplessness as I pondered the implications of what I was seeing. Now, free fall behavior was later confirmed by detailed analysis as I worked with some of my students, and independently then by David Chandler, who will be speaking to us later. I showed the World Trade Center 7 video to my physics department chair. He came by my office at one time, and I showed that to him. And he affirmed to me that I had full academic freedom to study this if I wanted to. I did. And so, now remember, that was spring of 2005. By September of that year, I was ready to go before my peers and present the accumulated data and analysis. I invited faculty from BYU and nearby universities to come and pick apart my research findings. It was rather like a doctoral defense, to tell you the truth. After 2 hours of presentation and vigorous discussion, we had to leave the room, unfortunately, because a class was scheduled for that same room. But I asked the group of about 70 professors before they left, did I have enough data to justify pursuing this research? Only one professor voted against it. And you know, the next day, the next morning, he contacted me and said that he had thought about it and changed his mind. He now supported my research. It was about this same time that I talked to David Ray Griffin by phone and received further encouragement. He became a thoughtful mentor to me throughout the following months. With his encouragement, I began writing down my results, and I put these on my faculty web page with a paper that changed and morphed and grew as my research continued. But opposition also mounted. David told me not to be surprised by this. In September 2006, I was placed on administrative leave at Brigham Young University. Okay, that action did surprise me, to tell you the truth. They expressed to me my main options. 1, I could try to fight this and I would be fired. 2, I could step down from my full professorship. Or 3, I could accept an offer of early retirement with a stipend. Now, David helped me see how BYU had supported my research up to that time. So for about nearly a year and a half. And how they must have been feeling great external pressure. Mm-hmm. He encouraged me to accept option number 3. After BYU declined my request for a hearing with me present, which that surprised me too. But in any case, after that, I did accept option 3, and I early retired in January of 2007. Now, 3 months later, in April, in a highly publicized event on BYU campus, none other than Vice President Dick Cheney was given an honorary doctoral degree by BYU. I wonder how many of you remember that. I remember it very well. And he was actually the keynote speaker at the BYU commencement that year.
Wow.
So yes, I recognized in this at least some of the external pressure that had been placed on BYU. Cheney's office had been in contact with BYU for months. This was reported in newspaper accounts leading up to his visit to the university and his receiving the honorary doctoral degree for public service. Now, I must say that event brought tears to my eyes. I just could hardly believe that they would do that. Mm-hmm. As did placing me on administrative leave. That also brought, but at least it was paid administrative leave, so that was helpful. Now, I felt that David Griffin was correct in his analysis of the situation, and this mitigated any bitterness I felt towards BYU at ending my career there. Now, several months after my early retirement, I should say that BYU quietly gave me the honor of becoming an emeritus full professor of physics. And also some of the administrators there told me that my publication record, which included papers in Scientific American, Nature, and Physical Review letters, was indeed top-notch. So I concluded that David had been right all along. He remained a great friend through the years since then, and I miss him. I should note that David and I shared strong beliefs in God and in an afterlife existence. You know, I'm totally confident that he is enjoying that afterlife even now, and I think he may even be listening in. And so in conclusion, I want to say thank you, David, my friend.
Oh, yes. And in fact, Stephen, David took on, I think in the last year, the life after death issue. And he wrote a book and about this, and knowing that he was facing his final struggle, or celebration, however you want to perceive it. And Robert McDermott, the author of the Introduction to William James Essays in Psychical Research at Harvard University Press, wrote this about the book in the way of a foreword. He says, life after death, it's a question that theologians, scientists, and philosophers have tried for centuries to answer one way or the other. One side appeals to divine revelation. The other side relies on mind-body dualism and limits what counts as evidence by denying the full range of human experience. Using the mature work of philosophers William James and Alfred North Whitehead, Griffin presents a lucid case for life after death that is broadly inclusive of all types of human experience, including near-death experiences. So he was all over this.
Yeah, thank you. I was not familiar with that book, so I appreciate that, Richard.
So I tend to agree with you. I think David is here with us, and I'll join you in telling you, David, we love you and we hold you in our hearts in your transition time. And we hope you will, from the other side, help as many people wake up to what you have woken up to.
Good point. Yeah.
As possible. We need your help still. So don't go, too far. Is that fair, Stephen?
I think that's fair. Yeah. Thank you, Richard. Yeah.
Oh gosh.
I appreciate David's influence very much in my life.
And I think Gail might have a
well, yes, and I just want to let everybody know that I just found out that you guys are commenting on StreamYard. However, I don't see anything other than our private chat. So I was informed that a lot of people are commenting there. So we deeply apologize for missing those.
Well, wait a sec. Alan, can you take the comments from your position of manager inside that vehicle and put those comments in the private chat so Gail can see them.
That would be awesome. And there are some comments and questions on the website, which I can see. I just logged into the website. All right. This is from John Musser. Dr. Griffin and Dr. Jones are the two most influential researchers who originally brought me to 9/11 Truth. Still, to this day, it's their work, along with Richard's, that I point people to who are not yet awake or just barely waking up. Even 20 years later, people are waking up to 9/11 Truth. Your presentations are still making a big impact. Thank you, Stephen, Richard, and DRG.
Wow, thank you.
Very sweet.
Very nice comment. Thank you.
Yes.
And thank you also to another very special soul, Dr. Niels Harrit, professor of chemistry, emeritus. And while before we hear from Niels, apparently we have David Davenport, a comment. Oops, he's gone.
Oh, see, when we put the comments into the private chat, it reads it. Yeah, it puts it up there. So again, a great note to end on. Stephen, I wholeheartedly believe in life after death. And if most humans were to acquire this belief, the world's problems would be resolved.
Excellent point.
Yes.
And back to David. Very inspirational, says Rich. We won't read all of them, but Ellen, if you want to post those, we really appreciate it. We'll read what we can, but they're coming and going, and that's fine. Everybody can at least read them. Let's bring on Mr. Niels Harrit to the stream. Niels, I am honored to have you with us today.
Hi, Niels.
Hello, David. Hello, Stephen.
Hello.
Okay.
Now, you and Stephen have something in common.
Yes, we do.
Quite a lot.
Over to you, Niels.
Thank you.
How many years did you guys work together on the incredible paper, Active Thermitic Materials in the World Trade Center?
Early 2008, January 2008.
Right.
Right.
An incredible work, of course, the pinnacle of forensic evidence that we all use in the 9/11 Truth movement. Those of us who know what evidence is use it, and it's used well. It goes far. Thank you, Stephen. We'll let you go, and you'll be monitoring from behind, and we move to our deep friend Niels Harrit. Niels, share with us your thoughts about David Ray Griffin.
Well, my thoughts will be rather short and very personal, since we can all point to people who change our lives in a decisive way. More than most, David Ray Griffin has bended the trajectory of many people's lives into a more honest, dedicated, uncompromising, and fearless direction. I became one of them after I discovered the realities of 9/11 in 2006, or rather 9/11 came to me, because nobody goes out to look for 9/11. 9/11 comes to you as a revelation. And for some, there is no way back thereafter. Truth is a one-way street. It becomes a categorical imperative to speak out. And like Galileo almost 400 years ago, David Ray Griffin took the lead. He was blessed with an enormous capacity for collecting evidence, evaluating it, and transforming it into highly readable, meticulous prose, which was received by a huge audience. In his presentations, we saw a man of the ultimate integrity, laying out the facts and the consequences with great clarity. From the beginning, Griffin's books served as the eye-opener and the source for factual evidence for many. Thus, Griffin's book on 9/11, The New Pearl Harbor, became the first book of reference for so many people at that time. For me too. It was even published in Danish, which is a tiny little speech area, believe me, and immediately the publisher went broke. So we sold the book at a symbolic price out of the trunk of my car and gave it away to some important people. I met David Ray Griffin for the first time in 2009 in Switzerland. And the famous, respected, awesome academic giant became a down-to-earth, warm and humorous man. He became David, a friend. It turned out, actually, that he had played the trumpet in his youth. And since I have a sidekick playing the saxophone, we talked about playing together one day when our mission was accomplished. That shouldn't be. But from then on, I've had the honor to cooperate with David on many projects and initiatives over the years. What stands out are the Foundation of Scientists for 9/11 Truth and my service as member of the panel on the Consensus Project, which Elizabeth talked about earlier on. We talked on the phone occasionally, but met in person only a handful of times, fewer than I could have wished for. But simply by being there, somewhere, as the man he was, he remains a constant point of reference, a perpetual shining beacon in the fight for truth. Now, the man is gone, but the light still shines. Thank you, David, and thank you for listening, all of you.
Thank you, Niels.
Yes, thank you, Niels, so much.
Very touching.
Yes.
Gail, do you have a comment or a question? Well, how about David Moudry? I resent how the media can simply dismiss any challenges to 9/11 as coming from conspiracy theorists, especially when these challengers are highly educated people with more than ample credibility, like Mr. Professor Niels Harrit. Gail?
Cat. Let's arrest the criminals.
Right.
Yes. Let's see. Yes, there are some questions, but we'll save those for the end. So just to let everybody know that if your comment includes a question, we'll wait till the end and then we'll ask our panelists and let them answer.
Okay, so that's it for comments?
new ones that I have,
Okay.
unless Alan has more that I don't see.
Well, Alan, you can display those comments while we're at an appropriate moment to do so. Thank you, Niels. Rich Sheck says, I'd like to introduce our next couple of distinguished panelists, which include David Chandler, a physics teacher, and his partner, Fran Shure, psychotherapist. Let's see if we can find them. I love this hunt. There's Mr. David Chandler. And hello, David.
Hello.
Hello,
we're doing
hello.
a little shuffle at this end, so there's
and
Fran.
There's Fran.
There's Fran. Hi, you guys.
Good to see you guys.
I'll shove back over when I'm giving my little bit, and then she'll come in after that. So
you want to say a farewell to our friend Niels Harrit?
Yes.
Hello. And
thank you, Niels.
We will catch up with you, Niels.
Fran
our work is not done.
To share a earbud here.
Our work is not
say
done.
Say goodbye to Niels.
Okay, my friend.
Hi, David and Fran.
Okay.
So
you
good
guys
to
want
see
to
you
share
guys.
some thoughts? David will go first.
Okay. I also was asked to do a little write-up for Off Guardian, and so I thought I would just present what I wrote for them. And it's just very brief, but maybe there's time for a little bit more after that. I think a lot of people may be wondering why a theologian is a prominent figure in the 9/11 Truth Movement. I have a little insight into this question because after graduating with a degree in physics, I spent a year in seminary. I was actually considering going into the ministry at that time. A lot of people maybe don't know that. One of the topics we studied was something called process theology. David Ray Griffin and his mentor, John Cobb, have been the preeminent advocates for this view of theology. In fact, John Cobb came and spoke to our class at that time. For them, God is not some distant, omnipotent being who rules over the world like a monarch. In process theology, God literally inhabits our world and ourselves. As we go through our earthly struggles, God accompanies us in those struggles. He literally rejoices when we rejoice, and he feels our pain and anguish. Our world is where God works, through us and alongside of us. Knowing where David Ray Griffin was coming from, it's understandable that shining the light of truth on a major turning point in history was consistent with his theological perspective. David Ray Griffin's most significant contribution to the 9/11 Truth Movement was to become an interpreter of the 9/11 events. Interpretation is critical. If we were to buy into the framing of 9/11 as a terrorist attack, our impulse would be to go find the terrorists. That's exactly what motivated so many young people to join the military after 9/11. However, if we interpret those events as a new Pearl Harbor, the title of his premier book on 9/11, and especially with the understanding that the original Pearl Harbor event was an attack that was allowed to happen to create a rationale for war, our response would be very different. David Griffin's insight reframed 9/11 as a war crime that needed to be investigated. In a real sense, it was David Ray Griffin's framing of 9/11 that created the 9/11 Truth Movement. David Ray Griffin has passed on, but the movement to shine the light of truth on the events of 9/11 continues. Sorry. Okay.
We share
That's it.
Your deep feelings. Thank you, David.
So, do you want to move into the picture, Fran?
Let's bring Ms. Fran Shure to the fore. Now, no emotions, Fran. This is a highly technical. Just kidding. We're celebrating the life of David Ray Griffin And we're mourning the loss as well. The range of feelings I've gone through in putting this together myself have been enormous, and I've grown a lot putting together this esteemed group of people who care so much and have been so impacted by David Ray Griffin. Hi, Fran.
Hi, Richard.
Hi, so good to see you. You have some thoughts to share with us too?
I do, and I'm so happy and honored to be able to do that. I'm going to tell you some very personal recollections in my interactions with David Ray Griffin, and some of them will hark back to this interview you have with Stephen Jones. So David Ray Griffin and I met in October of 2007 when I picked him up at the airport in Denver for 2 speaking events that we had arranged for him in Denver and Boulder. I was his chauffeur and his constant companion for 4 days during that time. He told me that the talk he gave at Denver's Iliff School of Theology was one of his favorites. And he had been disappointed that even though he has spoken and written about the implications of 9/11, for Christians, he had not received even one invitation from churches or seminaries. So he was delighted to get an invitation from Dr. Vincent Harding, who was professor emeritus at the Iliff School of Theology. And David Ray Griffin and Dr. Vincent Harding were both Methodist theologians. Dr. Harding was well known as a civil rights activist and as Dr. Martin Luther King's speechwriter. So this was very special to be invited by him to come speak in Denver. In his talk, David challenged Christians with his observation that the greatest obstacle to the truth that 9/11 was an inside job is not the lack of evidence, but what can be called nationalist faith. The conviction that the leaders of our nation simply would not do such a thing. He compared this current situation with the situation in Nazi Germany, in which the majority of Christians during that era supported the Nazi regime. And they betrayed, by doing so, they betrayed their Christian values. So David and I talked about many things as I chauffeured him from place to place, and we went from event to event, and we bonded through our interactions during those 4 days. But then, as what happens with friends often, a disagreement ensued. Now, it was a disagreement about 9/11, and I wonder if any of you can guess what it is. What is arguably the most controversial issue within the 9/11 truth movement? I
don't know if I want to guess.
I almost tremble to even mention the word. It was what happened at the Pentagon.
Oh, boy.
We in Colorado had been studying this quite a bit, all of the issues with 9/11. We were giving courses at the Colorado Free University. And our Colorado group had called him to convey that we thought that David should not be conclusive about no large plane hitting the Pentagon, which he was edging into at that time. One of our members who was not invited came on that telephone call, and he was a person with a lot of anger and very toxic, and he really laid into David and was very angry with him. I was horrified. He was not supposed to be on that call. So I emailed David later and just profusely apologized for what had happened. And I could tell David was very hurt. He was a very sensitive man. And no matter his great intellect, he was a sensitive soul. And he was shaken. So during that period, David challenged me, and he asked me if I'd done my homework on the Pentagon. And he said, had I read his chapter in The New Pearl Harbor Revisited on that issue? And I said, no, I had not. And so I said I would read that chapter and I'd get back with him. And so I did. And I read it thoroughly, and I got back with David and said that I still believe that because of looking at all the evidence carefully, we still should not be conclusive about that issue. And then when I saw David at the Deep States Conference in Santa Cruz. And when I saw him, I immediately went up, grabbed his arm, and apologized again for that other person that was on the phone who was so angry with him. And then David later walked up to me just a few minutes later, put his arm around my shoulders, and said something in his usual facetious wit, which told me that he had accepted my apology, and I felt that our heart connection had been restored.
Oh.
So that was very nice. I really felt the connection again. Eventually, he sent me a copy of his 2011 book, 9/11, 10 years later, with a personal note written on the inside saying, I think, Fran, that you will be especially interested in Chapter 7, in which he had written a more even-handed argument about what happened at the Pentagon. And to be sure, I'm not the only person who convinced him to be more even-handed. It was a lot of people who had been talking to him. I was just one. In the meantime, Elizabeth Woodworth had emailed me, and she and David had invited me to be on the consensus panel. And I say this just to demonstrate that the character of David Ray Griffin. He did not need me to agree with him. He did not need me to be his devotee. I think he saw that I could do my own homework and I could think for myself. And therefore, he would ask me to be on the panel for that reason. In the summer of 2010, so that was the end of that little episode. And I just want to say that the art of civil conversation, civil discourse when we have disagreements is lost, but David had not lost that. We were able to have civil discourse about a very controversial subject, and I really respect that. In the summer of 2010, as we all know, David Ray Griffin almost died due to several very serious health issues. I wanted to write him, and I was hesitant to do so because I didn't know how he'd respond. But I wrote to him anyway, and here's my words. I said, I have been deeply engrossed in learning about near-death experiences and what these experiences the experiencers have come back to teach us. I am so far convinced that this is not a brain phenomenon. So David responded, and here are his words. On near death, you may now know that I have a chapter in my book, my 1997 book, Parapsychology, Philosophy, and Spirituality. I also concluded that near-death experiences cannot be explained purely as brain phenomena, quote unquote.
Yeah.
So I was glad I had broached the subject. I don't do it to take away people's grief because we're human and we need to have our grief. So we need to keep that in mind. Then in the summer of 2017, David was then diagnosed with aggressive prostate cancer, and the medication he was prescribed was to give him either 6 months or 6 years to live. Again, I wrote to him, and I said, well, David, I'll put my vote in for 6 years if this is what you want. And what a challenge this must be for both you and your wife. And it's one we will all face someday. David responded to me, yes, I will want the full 6 years. Then quoting Robert Frost, he wrote, I have many more books to write before I sleep.
Wow.
Also, he said, I have not completely given up on exposing 9/11. My Bush and Cheney book, along with our 9/11 consensus book, will be my final efforts. I wrote back to him, "Good, but as you know, death is not asleep. If the hundreds of thousands of near-death experiencers are correct, according to them, death is more of an awakening into reality." David said, "Yes, I know, but I just couldn't resist modifying Robert Frost's line." So that was the words, "The woods are lovely, dark, and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep." So he said, "I have books to write before I sleep."
Wow.
So there's more to share with you all, and if we were in a more leisurely conversation, I would, but I'll conclude with just thank you to David Ray Griffin. Thank you, David, for being so open and for being so honest that you would risk your stellar reputation to speak your truth about 9/11, for bringing huge credibility to our movement, and for living your values, such as your faith in God rather than in nationalist faith. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Fran. What do you bet that he is still writing books today? Speaking of books, one of the wonderful volunteers in our world at RichardGage911 is Dan Noel, who has taken the last week to help us put together the thoughts and the books and the experiences in writing of David Ray Griffin, and has made a very special webpage on our website for David, for you, for that, so that you can see what is process theology, what was David spending his first 50 years studying before he got into 9/11, and the carousels of the videos are there for you to free to watch because of Dan. I just want a big shout out to Dan for that humongous effort. Dan's an incredible volunteer. Dan Noel. Gail, do you have some comments for?
No new comments unless Alan has some.
There's one. All beauty and love in this world depends on truth, and this group is some of the most critical carriers of light and truth. Thank you, David Cox. This is yours, Gail.
All right, Marvin Sands. Wow, Fran and David look good. Cheating time.
Cheating time. How about
you guys
that?
do look good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify something, if I may. I wasn't that person that she was talking about that was getting angry at David Griffin.
Oh,
we hadn't gotten together yet.
I didn't even think that.
Yeah, that was before your time. I think I know who that was, actually. But we're not going to play that game. In fact, you guys, speaking of friends in the 9/11 Truth movement to share with, I would like to bring on a very special friend who is Barbara Honegger, author and 9/11 researcher. Let's find Barbara. I've got so many wonderful people backstage, and I found her. Here she is, Ms. Barbara Honegger. Hello, Barbara. Oops. Where's your camera, Barb?
I'm here.
Yeah, I can see you're down there, but why isn't your camera showing? Do you see her?
I'm here. I see myself.
I don't see it. Well, I see that she should be there, but I don't see her.
Yeah.
I see her name.
I see myself.
Barb, I've never experienced this before.
What?
David and Fran, do you see Barbara? Can you guys see Barbara?
I'm going to remove you and add you back in. No, I add you back in and you're still not there. That's crazy.
She should make sure the little slide on her camera is.
Oh, do you have a privacy screen on your No, because she's seeing herself. Yeah. There you are.
I see myself.
Yeah, what'd you do?
Do you see me?
Yeah, we see you now.
I really was there.
All along, huh?
Yeah.
Good to know.
Hi, Barb.
Thank you, David and Fran. We'll catch up with you in just 10 minutes for the all together, all the panelists we're going to have a grand discussion together, and we'll answer some of your questions at that time. So thanks, David and Fran. Stand by, and let's go to Barbara. Share your thoughts about David Ray Griffin.
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is how honored it is to be included. Thank you so much, Richard and Gail and Elizabeth. That's number one. Also, I'm glad that Fran actually went before me, and you will see why. When I go into my very personal as well as public experiences with the phenomenal David Ray Griffin. I would also like to say that as I woke this morning, knowing that we were going to be holding this memorial, I experienced great joy, like the Pentecost. And I feel that we are all apostles of David Ray Griffin and the truth, and bringing power to the truth, which is a response to what Paul Craig Roberts said. And I'll get to that, I hope, at the end of my short presentation here. I would like to begin by just saying that in addition to his incredible intellect as a great writer and the phenomenal evidence that he brought together in an incredible way in all of those dozen or so books on 9/11, I want to remember his humor, because when David would give a public presentation, he would have the entire audience, including myself, of course. I was at almost everything that he did that I could possibly physically go to. He would have the audience laughing while they were getting it, while they were getting really hard truths to digest. He would have us laughing. And I also want to remember his phenomenal logic. When you read his books, it wasn't just the evidence, it was how he put it together and the phenomenal logic. You couldn't deny it. You couldn't unknow what he taught you. Okay, that's a big picture comment. And now I'd like to share with the audience and the other members of the panel and our hosts. Some of you already know some of what I'm about to say, but none of you know all of what I'm about to share with my personal experiences with David that are truly miraculous, genuinely miraculous. So the first one I want to share is, and Richard knows this well because we conspired to make this event happen. In the lead up to the 9th anniversary, as I recall the chronology, Richard held an event that I attended, and so did David, in San Francisco for, as I recall, it was the 1,000th signatory on the Architects and Engineers petition. And after that event that Richard put on, he held a kind of a brainstorming session. And it was in that brainstorming session with, well, maybe 3 dozen of us in the 9/11 Truth Movement, that I had this incredible vision that we had to put up a 3rd beam in the sky, physically in New York City. And so for 3 times, I called Richard, and I said, Richard, we really need to put this 3rd beam up in New York City. And he said, yeah, Barb, I know, but I'm doing these other things. And finally, at a meeting at none other than Ken Jenkins' house, where Mike Gravel, former Senator Mike Gravel, was, we were at a break and we were having the finger food for lunch. And I went over and I stood next to Richard and I said, Richard, we really do need to put a 3rd beam up in New York City. And he started to say again, yeah, I know, Barb, but I've got these other priorities. And then suddenly he said, you mean actually put up a 3rd beam?
Yep.
And I said, yes, Richard.
A real beam?
I will never forget the look on his face. Oh my God, it just was brilliant light, And so we conspired to make that happen, the 2 of us. together with my partner, Steve White, in New York City. And the bottom line is, in the lead up to the 9th anniversary, we put together to actually doing this. And I was the operational person in charge of it in New York City. And so on the day of the 9th anniversary event, the 9th anniversary event in New York City, Richard was a speaker, and so was I. But at night, we had conspired that Richard would announce to all of the activists there in the room at the conference that we were going to take a break and we were going to go down the street, and there was going to be an exciting event that was about to happen. And so Richard is putting up on the screen. Actually, Richard, could you put up the other one first, please? The other third beam photo? Yeah. So this is the moment when I press the buttons on 4 incredible generators to produce this 2 billion candle power beam. That is the beam on the left. That's the third beam that burst into the sky from the back of the pickup truck where I was standing. And at that moment where it whooshed into the sky, you can see probably 50 9/11 Truth activists who are standing there on the sidewalk and around the truck. And as that happened, as it whooshed into the sky, there was this immense joy that went up. And when it died down a little bit, I yelled to the group that David Ray Griffin was at death's door, and that could we send a prayer to him on the beam. And we all did that.
Mm-hmm.
And then later we took down the beam. And that night, after we had taken the spotlights and the generators back to Steve White's apartment near Ground Zero, I emailed Elizabeth Woodworth. And I told her that the third beam had been a success. And could she please let Anne, David Ray Griffin's wife, know? And she said she would. And it wasn't too long before I got an email back from Elizabeth, or a call, I can't remember. I think it was an email, but I got the communication back from Elizabeth that she had heard from Anne, and that the gist of the message was that Anne got the message, and by David's bed, she whispered in his ear that the third beam had been a success, and that the prayer had gone up for him on the beam. And that a huge smile came over his face, and that he opened his eyes and asked for pen and paper to write down everything else he still needed to do for 9/11 Truth. And he came back. And the next event that I want to mention, and could we have the other third beam photo now? If we could see that. So right after the prayer went up on the beam, there's Richard on the right and Manny Badillo, who was a New York City 9/11 Truth activist.
And a family member.
And a victim's family member, absolutely very active. And me in the middle. Looks like the 3 beams are going out of my head there. And then if we could see the next photograph, the final one. Yes. So it wasn't, David had a significant recovery period. And when he was finally able to walk again with a cane, he was invited to the San Diego home of Ted and Nelise Muga for his first coming out back into the 9/11 Truth movement for a meeting at their home. And I received a call about a week before in which I was asked to come down and make a presentation to him. And so that was a great honor. And this is the moment where the whole group of us who got together before he and his wife Anne, who is over on the right, that's his wife Anne.
Oh.
Yeah, that's Anne. Before he arrived with Anne, and he was walking very gingerly and quite weak still, but definitely back with us and doing his 9/11 work, we had all signed the back of this poster that was taken of the most famous photo by Scott Starr of the third beam. Mm-hmm. And there are, at least 30 signatures of 9/11 truth activists on the left. And I had the honor of making this presentation with great thanks to him. And so if you could take that off the screen.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to go to the next event, which was because David came back. He was able, of course, shortly after that, to be at the Toronto hearings for his presentation for the 10th anniversary of 9/11. And myself and Niels Harrit, Niels Harrit's wife, and David Ray Griffin and others stayed together at a residence of Karen Brothers, I believe is her name, in Toronto. And we drove to the Toronto hearings together. And we gave our presentations, and then we were having dinner back at the Brothers' home that night. And before dinner, David always liked to have a glass of red wine. And he invited me to go into the sitting room, and it was just the two of us with our glasses of red wine. And he lifted his glass, and he asked me to lift mine, and we clinked our glasses. And he just said, "Thank you." He said, "Thank you." So, that's not a moment where you say, "Well, what are you thanking me for?" But I had a pretty good idea. And I believe that David had a near-death experience. When he was told, "No, it's not your time yet," which is common in almost every near-death experience. "No, you have to go back. You have work to do." And that's why he asked for the pen and paper from his wife, Anne. So then I think I want to end with just reminding people of all the books that David was able to write on 9/11 truth and all these other extremely important subjects after he came back in what I believe is a true miracle. When we prayed for him on the third beam, we brought him home. And when I woke up this morning with this great joy, it's because I know he's here. I know he's here. So, David, thank you so much for all you have done and continue to do. You are a great soul, and we thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you.
We sure do. And I know that Elizabeth Woodworth thanks you. I know that Stephen Jones thanks you. I know that Niels Harrit thanks you. I know that David Chandler and Fran Shure thank you. I know that Peter Dale Scott thanks you. And I know that Paul Craig Roberts thanks you. All of us thank you from the bottom of our heart. Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
We might have one more comment, Gail, and/or question for our whole group here.
All right,
Here's Emily. You want to read Emily's while it's up?
Yes. David, walk with us, stand behind our shoulders, and whisper guidance in our ears. Shout if need be. Help us rebuild trust and honor on earth. Oh, that's very
beautiful.
Sweet.
And
very
Ken
sweet.
Jenkins also. Hi, Ken. I almost forgot you. I told you there's a. Did I leave anybody else out? I hope not. Other comments, Gail, and then we'll have a little.
I don't see any more comments.
Okay.
There was just a couple questions. Let
All
me.
Right. Who got something left out? Steve, we can hardly see your. Stephen, we can hardly see your face there. Oh, there you are. And if you're on mute, in case you don't want to be, who's got something to share?
I do.
Barb.
Yeah. Because I wanted to stay in my 10 minutes, and I hope I was able to do that. I did want to add, and you'll have to remind me, Richard, exactly which anniversary event it was. I believe it was 3 or 4 years ago when you held, I believe, the first year of the pandemic, when you held our first online 9/11 anniversary event that you hosted, a webinar, Zoom event. And David Ray Griffin, along with Stephen Jones and Niels Harrit and others, had this special segment on that anniversary event in which David was asked, what, with all that we face getting the truth acknowledged officially, I think other people are talking.
Yeah, I just muted Niels. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. You asked, or someone asked, I believe it was you who asked, David, what gives you hope? What still gives you hope? And his answer, which was extremely encouraging, seeing as I was on the 9/11 Lawyers Committee, the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, of which I'm now the chairman of the board. And as you know, Richard, you are on our board, luckily, for us in the movement. David said, what gives me hope is the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. So I noticed in the chat, I wasn't going to mention this, except the question was asked, actually, where can people donate in David's memory? And because the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry was so incredibly important to him, it was his hope for officializing the truth, which is what we are doing uniquely in the 9/11 Truth Movement. I would invite you, in David's name, to donate to the legal effort at the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Truth. And the simple way to do that is to go to LC, that stands for Lawyers Committee, LC4, FOR, 911.org, LC4911.org, and donate to our legal fund there, and do so in the notes. When you click donate, you will be able to say that this is on behalf of the memory of David Ray Griffin. Thank you.
Thank you, Barb. That's very special. I didn't realize that David had made those comments. I'm so glad you told us that.
It's on video.
Yeah. Elizabeth, we haven't heard from you for so long.
Oh, Richard, I want to thank you, Richard, and Gail for doing this. It's just the most wonderful thing you could have done.
Oh,
and
thank you.
And it brought all these people that love David together, which is wonderful. And I love every one of these people and have done for a long time.
And we love you.
Yeah, that's for sure. We've all been working together for a decade and a half at least, most of us. Who else? Just speak up. We don't have to even raise your hand.
Don't be shy.
Gail, do you have a comment from Ken Davis?
I do. I just put it up there. He says, I was on to the deception from the moment they started talking about the buildings coming down on the news live feeds. It was a long time of feeling alone before finding the greats like Mr. Griffin and many of your panelists. Fearless. Do you feel that now we have his complete works, they should be somehow provided, flooding YouTube and other platforms with his works? 9/11 is far from a dead issue. It was in retrospect exactly what has been feared, a beginning of a loss of humanity.
Who wants to take that one on?
Well, it shouldn't be, certainly it's still a live issue. I think one of the things that needs to happen, you know, I talk about deep events, and there is no more quintessential deep event than 9/11. One very much like it, of course, is the Kennedy assassination. And I actually have published a bit about similarities between deep events. I think it's in my book, what is my book called? The American Deep State. And now I pointed out that a key figure here, unlike most others, is Dick Cheney, because Dick Cheney was in a position on 9/11 to implement the plans for continuity of government, which he himself had been working on for 20 years, even though he was not in the government. and which a good journalist had called a plan to suspend the American Constitution. Yeah. I think it's essentially that. And I want to add that it became known, but not publicized early on, that on January 6th, continuity of government was implemented again. And it was implemented by the acting Attorney General, Mr. Rosen. And I'm waiting for the media to mention COG in connection with January 6th or the Congressional Committee. None of them have done it. Back in 2008, I tried to mount, I worked with an ex-congressman. We tried to, through the 9/11 movement, we tried to mount a campaign to get Congress to terminate the state of emergency that was declared a couple of days after 9/11. And they wouldn't do it. But apparently somebody got an answer from his congressman, said, oh, yes, that part of the law is not in operation anymore. It was changed by COG. So here's the, I don't know what the facts are because we're not able to see COG rules, but one became very clear on 9/11. That was that the president and the vice president shouldn't be in the same city at the same time. That's how they told Ashcroft, the Attorney General, not to go back to the Justice Department under the same rule, which is why the Cheney and his lawyer friend Addington were working with John Yoo, who was a very junior man who just arrived in the department. So
if David Ray Griffin had taken on the issue of continuity of government, it's a big and very important topic. Anybody know?
Not to my knowledge.
Yeah. Other thoughts?
I could just say one thing about this 9/11. Having been an engineering student at Georgia Tech, it was obvious those buildings did not fall down from asymmetrical structural damage. But what really gave the show away was that if the official explanation was right, then the president, Cheney, the Congress, the whole government would have been screaming and yelling, how did this happen? How could such total failure engulf the national security state where every institution completely failed? I mean, if you look at the official story, it makes the United States look like the most incompetent organization that ever existed on earth. And once I saw that there was no clamor to get to the bottom of this, but they were doing everything they could to avoid even a superficial 9/11 commission. You know, it took over a year to get that.
Yeah.
This was a complete, I mean, I spent 25 years in Washington, very highly placed. And I know for a fact, if the official story had had any truth to it, the president, everybody would have been screaming, heads would have rolled. I mean, this was the greatest embarrassment to a superpower in world history, that a few Saudi Arabians could completely defeat the national security state. And the fact that nothing was done to get at the bottom of it is the most complete evidence you needed that this was an inside job. They weren't about to investigate. But if the story was real, there would have been massive investigations. They'd probably still be going on. All kinds of people would have been fired, held accountable. Instead, they all got promoted. So right. This is the dead giveaway. I mean, you don't even need any physical evidence.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't describe. I mean, the physical evidence that has been gathered is amazing. It's conclusive, but you don't even need it when you see that they were not going to do anything about the most humiliating thing that could have ever happened to the United States. Yeah. And moreover, no one ever said, good gosh, this is humiliating.
Yeah.
Lack of defenses.
I'll have everybody turn down your volume to where you can just hear me so we don't get an echo. The high volumes on on your speakers will be a problem. Gail, do you have a comment for us?
Yes, Gail, I do. Yes, I certainly do. This is from Lynn Pence. She says, "Thank you, Richard, and all the wonderful contributors to this memorial. What a great, great man David was. As co-founder of 9/11 Truth LA, producer and host of the first Citizens Grand Jury on the crimes of 9/11, and producer and creative director of the homemade early documentary, Connecting the Dots, Awakening to the Crimes of 9/11, I was privileged many times to commiserate and collaborate with David, each time a unique and profound blessing. May his spirit this day be lifted to the very highest realms as he lifted all he touched, walking so gently yet powerfully on the planet Earth. His light shines on, his truth endures, his grace but a whisper away. We'll miss you, precious one, in eternal love and gratitude."
She's going to make me cry.
I know, me too. Make myself cry.
Thank you, Lynn.
Yeah, thanks, Lynn.
May I add something to Lynn's?
Thank you.
Yes.
Lynn and I are very, very close soul sisters. And I was one of the expert witnesses at those citizens' grand juries on the crimes of 9/11. She put on 2 in Los Angeles at a very prestigious venue. And what I wanted to mention is the closest thing the 9/11 Truth Movement has had to date to a real grand jury. And there are 2 things I want to mention about that. The first is it's actually the Consensus Project, because that's close to, if I'm not incorrect, Elizabeth, weren't there something like 23 panelists? And there are usually 23 members of a grand jury.
Interesting.
Coincidence.
I'm sorry, what?
Just a coincidence.
Yeah, well, maybe not. So your book, 9/11 Unmasked, I'm going to propose be submitted as a supplement to our grand jury petition on the World Trade Center in New York City. And for any of the members of the audience or even the panelists here who don't know, the most important action that the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry has done to date, they're all important and they're all on our website. Every single legal filing we have done is on our website at lcfor911.org, so be sure to go there if you haven't already. But arguably the most important is our World Trade Center Grand Jury petition, which Richard Gage and our Lawyers Committee, before he became board member of the Lawyers Committee, collaborated together. And we filed that with the U.S. Attorney for the Federal Second Circuit in New York on, I think it was April 11th, it was 2018. And they got back to us and they said, yes, we will obey the federal statute that requires us to give this to a special criminal grand jury, which was our petition. And there were something like 50 evidentiary exhibits. They're all on our website. You can read them. And what many people may not know is that the U.S. Attorney for a number of years, even though he said he would obey the federal statute that requires him to do that, he refused to actually say that he'd done it. And so after a few years, we filed a mandamus action. That was before Richard Gage came on our board. We filed a mandamus action and we waited. And then we were told that even 9/11 victims' family members and first responder victims' family members did not have legal standing to sue, if you can imagine. Then we appealed to the appeals court for the Second Circuit, Federal Circuit there in Manhattan, which is the federal jurisdiction for the World Trade Center Tower events on and World Trade Center events on 9/11. And they agreed with the first court, and they said, No American citizen, including 9/11 victims' family members and first responders, have any standing to sue. And so we have now appealed to the Supreme Court. On November 3rd, the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, and now with Richard on the board, we have filed what is called a petition for certiorari, with the Supreme Court, and we are waiting to hear if they will accept if they will accept the lawsuit. It's extremely unlikely that they will, but we are cautiously optimistic because last year the Supreme Court only accepted less than 1% of all of the 8,000 requests to take the court cases. But we are never going to give up. And I just want to remind everybody that David Ray Griffin did say that the Lawyers Committee's legal actions, which put power and officializing the truth behind the evidence, that was his great hope. So please help us to help you to achieve his goals.
Thanks, Barb. Anybody else?
I wonder what Elon Musk thinks about it.
9/11 Truth?
He has 120 million Twitter followers right now. And he is going after the deep state on Twitter. I follow Twitter every day for hours because you get to hear what everybody in the world that matters is saying. And Musk he's taken all the deep state people out of the Twitter management. You know, like I was shut down for a medical librarian for quoting medical literature during COVID. Anybody who mentioned hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin on Twitter was knocked off.
Yeah.
And so he's restoring a lot of these accounts.
Has he restored yours?
No, he's not. He has, but
It's
he's
a very
restoring.
good point, though. Very good point. I think one should think about Elon Musk.
Sorry, Peter, I didn't hear you.
I'm saying that we should think about Elon Musk because he, there's a lot that's wrong about him, but he is a questioner. He's questioning the war in Ukraine. He wants it to end, which I must say I do too. So that I think I'm not the one to do it, but somebody should reach out to him, I think.
What was David's book revealing about the war in Ukraine, Elizabeth?
I only proofread one chapter back in April, and that was the chapter on Busha, which he said was a false flag, like the West has been accusing Russia of murdering all those people in Busha. And it was a Ukrainian, it was the Nazis in the Ukraine. It was a false flag. And David knew that, and he asked me to help him with that a little bit. So, but Clarity Press, and I know the publisher very well. We're really quite good friends. David asked her if he would publish this whole book like 3 or 4 days before he was sort of planning to end his life because he was so uncomfortable. And he postponed that. I shouldn't say this. I have said it. It's too late. Anyway, so I gather that a lot of it's like this a continuation of the other book, on the American trajectory, like what they're doing now. It's just an update on that.
We were talking about Twitter earlier, just a few minutes ago, and saying that we should reach out to Elon. Well, I did. What I said was, and a bunch of people retweeted it. People don't even know. But what I said was, Elon Musk, or at Elon Musk, do you think we will ever see justice for the victims and their families by exposing the truth about 9/11? The families, our country, and humanity deserve to know the truth, and those guilty deserve to be hung. Our country and the world needs a new investigation into 9/11. I don't know, maybe if enough people, contact him, who knows what he'll say. He'll probably ignore
David
it.
will talk to him.
Oh, there you go. His higher self.
He's got a direct line now.
Yeah.
Now we see Pernilla right next to Niels there. And Pernilla, hello. You're sort of half in and half out of our discussion. Can you slide to your left? We would love to see your whole lovely face. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Many of us have met Pernilla in Copenhagen. Hello.
Hi, Pernilla.
Hi. Hello.
Hi. It looks like you've cheated time too.
Sorry?
It looks like you've cheated time too.
Yes, yes, I can see that. What are your thoughts having watched all of this so far? Pernilla.
My thoughts about the whole evening? Or what?
About David, yes.
Yeah, well, I think we became good friends as well. I was even hugging him and kissing him and saying, have a nice time when we left each other in Toronto. And the first time I met him, I was so modest. I was so nervous about meeting such a great man. But in the end, we were laughing and cheering. And I think he was very, very kind and nice.
Aww.
And wise.
Aww. And Stephen, did you have any secret meetings with David that we don't know about?
I recall one time we were sitting at, it was like a picnic. I think you were there, Richard. It was outside, but I don't remember exactly where. But anyway, and we were just chatting, and he has a marvelous sense of humor. Mm-hmm. And as several have pointed out, but it was just fun and delightful to talk to him. Very personable, and just funny. There's one joke I remember, but I can't repeat it here, so I don't think I would. But
oh, come on, Steve.
No, don't.
I won't. But anyway, just so delightful to sit with him and talk to him. And yeah, he had a way, these are very difficult concepts because of the emotions involved and the biases that people carry. And as several have mentioned, the cognitive dissonance that Fran talks about also. So he uses humor to lighten the mood. I as a professor, I used humor in class, and I noticed that when I told a little joke, the students would pay attention for about 5 or 10 minutes, because they don't want to miss the next joke, And I think that David used that sort of approach to advantage. Just a marvelous speaker,
I'd like to pick up on that. That David was. He was very determined with his own point of view, but to complement that, he was also very broad-minded. I want to read another sentence from his book on Christian faith. Postmodern theology's doctrine of the divine attitude portrays an essentially pluralistic, multilateral world. It says that every center of experience is loved for its own sake. No center of experience is hated, and none is viewed as having only instrumental value. If I could apply that to my own case, when he invited me to participate in the conference that was talking about, every aspect of the, he knew that I disagreed with him on fundamental issues about 9/11. I think the planes was probably the chief one, but not the only one. And he could have suspected rightly that I was going to take issue with him on theological issues too, right? That this was the Roman Empire. I wrote about that in my talk because I had a more mixed view of America at that point in time as a Canadian looking outside than he did. And the fact that he very patiently answered every one of my comments, and I must say, I criticized him for.
We lost Peter.
Sorry?
We lost you there for just one sentence. Go back one sentence.
Well, my memory, short-term memory is so bad, I can't. I'll share another one. I criticized him for never having said more about Martin Luther King. And he wrote back and said, well, he had a 4,000-word manuscript that had never been published. It was exclusively devoted to Martin Luther King.
Wow.
So he was very good in answering my criticism, but that he took the time to do that is when I'm talking about his having breadth as well as depth and concentration, also tolerance of dissidence.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can add a story, a similar story. When David and I were first working on videos, I by then was agnostic on the Pentagon issue, but he had in one of his early videos the misperception that was all too common early on, that the hole was too small in the Pentagon. And so I sent him to Jim Hoffman's website where he'd corrected that misperception, and he allowed me to take that part out of that video. So, you know, if he saw the evidence, he would. He was very gracious that way.
Yeah.
And also, I just want to thank him. I don't think in my 10 minutes, I took the time to thank David for all that he's done for all of us and for the world. I'm also deeply grateful for everything he's done.
Thank you, Ken. I wanted to share that when this photo was taken, the day this was taken, Ken Jenkins had invited us to come and create a very special infomercial in Marin County, California. And we all showed up, and I was absolutely terrified. Ken, that was what, 2007, early years?
Something like that, yeah.
I hadn't done any real public speaking, much less been in front of 16 cameras like he had there and about 40,000 lights. And I was absolutely terrified. And I was shaking. And I looked over to David and I said, I'm so sorry, because I wasn't remembering my lines, and I was nervous and I was dry-mouthed, everything you could think of. And he looked at me and he said, "This doesn't faze me at all." He was so cool and so calm and so collected. And I was inspired by that. I took hope in that very much so. So there's the confident David, Ray Griffin.
I have an anecdote.
Let me just add to that one quickly. One of the best things to come out of that video shoot was not the video, unfortunately. It was, number one, it was, I think, the first time that those three respected gentlemen all got to meet each other in person and spend personal time face to face. And when the video ended up not being usable, I thought, well, we accomplished one thing, and I'm glad it was documented with that picture.
Yes. Why was it not usable, Ken?
A long story, not worth repeating to at this point.
Too bad.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
Other anecdotes?
I had an anecdote that doesn't quite fit the flow here, but I was thinking of it earlier. In terms of some of David's process theology concepts, one of the things is process theology is highly integrated with a scientific explanation of the universe. And so it supports the idea that God doesn't break the rules, that he basically works with us and through the universe, following the rules that are there. So it's not like he steps in and creates miracles in that sense. And so if you have that background knowledge, then when you read his book about World Trade Center 7, that's the theme of a couple of the chapters where he keeps accusing NIST of believing in miracles. If you realize what he's doing is saying, hey, I don't believe in miracles, and I'm a theologian. What are you doing believing in miracles, that this building could just come down? Anyway, that's the deal. That I mean, it was sort of like an inside joke if you knew where he was coming from, where that phrase originated, you know? So,
actually, that's a great story. And one of the best videos with David Ray Griffin is one I didn't make, which was up in Seattle after I was working with AE. And it was on that theme of, you know, why do people believe in miracles around 9/11? It was very well done.
Yeah, I have an anecdote about that.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you remember my presentation and that photograph of David when he first was able to walk, and we had that wonderful first get together with the 9/11 Truth Movement activists in San Diego at Ted and Elise Muga's house. Well, it was after that his first, as I understand it, Elizabeth can correct. This is what David told me anyway. That after this event, David accepted his first public speaking invitation after coming back from the moment of the third beam, where I believe he had a near-death experience and was told he had more work to do. He then was invited to, I believe it was Seattle Town Hall, and he gave his presentation, Why Do Bob Perry and, who was it, Ken? Why do Bob Perry and...
from PBS.
Yeah, PBS, yeah. Anyway, why do Bob Perry and the other guy, who was LBJ's White House press secretary, why do they believe in miracles? And I didn't realize that you hadn't done that video, but there is a video of that, and I have that DVD. I believe that maybe Mark Snyder, who was the videographer up there in Seattle, did that.
Yes.
And yes, I think so. And it was a great video also. And it is available from Mark Snyder and others from Seattle 9/11 Truth's website. So he gave this presentation. And in the presentation, because this was right after this event, not long after this event here in San Diego with the photo on the screen, in this presentation, he wanted to know, he was very, very hurt, personally hurt. Oh, Bill Moyers. Why do Robert Perry and Bill Moyers believe in miracles? In other words, the official story of 9/11 was what he meant by a, quote, miracle, unquote. And it was one of his most humorous presentations, but also very serious as usual. And in this presentation, he made the point that how could Robert Perry, whose website, consortiumnews.com, is still online and it's one of the best ever, still to this day, people who are carrying it on for him. He's no longer alive, unfortunately. But he asked the question, how could Robert Perry be so good on the October surprise, like Barbara Honegger? They both published books on this subject, and not be open-minded about 9/11.
And Bill Moyers did The Secret Government on PBS.
Yes, exactly. And he was personally hurt by this. And then he recommended to the Seattle 9/11 Truth people that I be invited to be the next speaker up there at Seattle Town Hall, which became my Pentagon documentary, Behind the Smoke Curtain, which is online. So that's another personal experience with David Ray Griffin. The very first thing when he came back, his very first presentation, he wanted to know, how come Bob Perry isn't seeing the reality like Barbara?
You know,
that was an honor.
We plan to feature that video at our next film festival, by the way, at my recommendation.
It's a wonderful video.
Oh, that'll be great.
He's still quite weak when he's giving that.
Well, he wasn't quite weak here. What did you guys think about this? How old was he when he gave this lecture? The picture in the upper right, I was so moved. Yeah. How many of you are delighted to see him at such a young age? I mean, I can't get over this.
I think he was in his early 40s then. Yeah, I've never seen it. The only picture I've seen of him around that time was his wedding picture in 1984 when he got married to Anne. And it looks about the same. But I just wanted to say about Robert Perry and Bill Moyers and Chomsky. I think David and I both thought that at least Chomsky had a visit from, somebody came to Chomsky, because Chomsky was actually questioning 9/11, and then he just shut up and said, that he wouldn't accept anything after a point. And obviously somebody knocked on his door and said, we have national security to think about, and you're too important. You got to shut your mouth.
No, I'd like to. I had many interchanges with Chomsky because he didn't believe me when I said that Kennedy had already approved a plan to start withdrawing troops from Vietnam. And I think I understand Chomsky's thinking. He's a structuralist. He thinks the whole American system is rotten, and that the idea that there could be a part of it that would do something against the rest doesn't interest him at all. He's just interested in attacking the whole system. I did a 5th essay on the Pentagon Papers, and oh dear. Anyway, somebody else, I'm dropping the name, a famous guy, said, we can't use that essay because you're saying it makes a difference who's president. And I said, yes, that's exactly the point of my paper. It made a difference who was president. Noam came back and he published the essay, but then he wrote a whole book attacking the essay. So that structural idea, it's all rotten. You don't start picking, looking here and something that. You attack capitalism, and that's the way to go. I must say, it sounds as if I don't respect Chomsky. I have an enormous respect for Chomsky, and he's done things. I mean, it's just he's very like David Ray Griffin in this respect. How can one man command so many facts in his head? But he has a kind of total approach to things. I think if somebody came in and threatened him, I think he would have risked his life to tell the rest of us about it.
Well, Chomsky did publish a book.
Final thoughts before we take off, Barb?
Just a comment on Chomsky, if I could. He did publish this very short book, in which, to my shock, he actually said in words, this is almost verbatim, it doesn't matter who did 9/11. Yes, it does.
Oh.
Yes, it does.
Wow.
That sums it up, yes. It follows from his worldview, but he's wrong on that.
Did David ever confront Chomsky?
Yeah, he did. I think it was so hopeless. Like, we both wrote to him he always answers. He never ignores an email. So he just says things like, I sent him a picture of the towers exploding upwards and said, how could that happen? And he wouldn't really engage with it.
Okay.
Well, us, folks.
Yeah.
What?
May I have a word here?
Yeah.
On the rottenness of the American system. As a foreigner sitting, I'm here very, very far apart from probably each of you. So, ladies and gentlemen, please recognize that an exchange like this on this evening here in Denmark could not have happened in any other country in any other world in this world. Okay.
Interesting.
But that's the American spirit, and I love it.
Thank you. Thank you, Niels. Good point.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Good to talk to you. Good to see everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, David.
Let's give a big, warm
thank you.
send off to David.
Yes.
David. Bye-bye, David. If you heard all this.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for watching. Catch up with you soon.